Chapter 19 of Work, A Story of Experience. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jennifer Stearns. Work, A Story of Experience by Louisa May Alcott. Chapter 19 Little Heart's Ease. When it was all over, the long journey home, the quiet funeral, the first sad excitement, then came the bitter moment when life says to the bereaved, "Take up your burden and go on alone." Christie's had been the still, tearless grief, hardest to bear, most impossible to comfort, and, while Mrs. Sterling bore her loss with the sweet patience of a pious heart, and Letty mourned her brother with a tender sorrow that finds relief in natural ways, the widow sat among them as tranquil, colorless, and mute, as if her soul had followed David, leaving the shadow of her former self behind. "He will not come to me, but I shall go to him," seemed to be the thought that sustained her, and those who loved her said despairingly to one another, "Her heart is broken, she will not linger long." But one woman, wise in her own motherliness, always answered hopefully, "Don't you be troubled. Nature knows what's good for us, and works in her own way. Hearts like this don't break, and sorrer only makes 'em stronger. You mark my words, the blessed baby that's a comin' in the summer will work a miracle, and you'll see this poor dear a happy woman yet." Few believed in the prophecy, but Mrs. Wilkins stoutly repeated it and watched over Christie like a mother, often trudging up the lane in spite of wind or weather to bring some dainty mess, some remarkable puzzle in red or yellow calico, to be used as a pattern for the little garments the three women sewed with such tender interest, consecrated with such tender tears, or news of the war fresh from Lisha, who was goin' to see it through if he come home without a leg to stand on. A cheery, hopeful, wholesome influence she brought with her, and all the house seemed to brighten as she sat there freeing her mind upon every subject that came up, from the delicate little shirts Mrs. Sterling knit in spite of failing eyesight, to the fall of Richmond, which, the prophetic spirit being strong within her, Mrs. Wilkins foretold with sibylline precision. She alone could win a faint smile from Christie, with some odd saying, some shrewd opinion, and she alone brought tears to the melancholy eyes that sorely needed such healing dew, for she carried little Adelaide, and without a word put her into Christie's arms, there to cling and smile and babble till she had soothed the bitter pain and hunger of a suffering heart. She and Mr. Power held Christie up through that hard time, ministering to soul and body with their hope and faith till life grew possible again, and from the dust of a great affliction rose the sustaining power she had sought so long. As spring came on, and victory over victory proclaimed that the war was drawing to an end, Christie's sad resignation was broken by gusts of grief so stormy, so inconsolable, that those about her trembled for her life. It was so hard to see the regiments come home proudly bearing the torn battle flags, weary, wounded, but victorious, to be rapturously welcomed, thanked, and honored by the grateful country they had served so well. To see all this and think of David in his grave unknown, unrewarded, and forgotten by all but a faithful few. I used to dream of a time like this, to hope and plan for it, and cheer myself with the assurance that, after all our hard work, our long separation, and the dangers we had faced, David would get some honor, receive some reward, at least be kept for me to love and serve and live with for a little while. But these men who have merely saved a banner, led a charge, or lost an arm, get all the glory, while he gave his life so nobly. Yet few know it, no one thanked him, and I am left desolate when so many useless ones might have been taken in his place. Oh, it is not just! I cannot forgive God for robbing him of all his honours, and me of all my happiness." So lamented Christie, with the rebellious protest of a strong nature learning submission through the stern discipline of grief. In vain Mr. Power told her that David had received a better reward than any human hand could give him, in the gratitude of many women, the respect of many men; that to do bravely the daily duties of an upright life was more heroic in God's sight than to achieve in an enthusiastic moment a single deed that won the world's applause, and that the seeming incompleteness of his life was beautifully rounded by the act that caused his death. Although no eulogy recorded it, no song embalmed it, and few knew it was but those he saved, those he loved, and the great commander who promoted him to the higher rank he had won. Christie could not be content with this invisible, intangible recompense for her hero. She wanted to see, to know beyond a doubt that justice had been done, and beat herself against the barrier that baffles bereaved humanity till impatient despair was wearied out, and passionate heart gave up the struggle. Then, when no help seemed possible, she found it where she least expected it, in herself. Searching for religion, she had found love; now seeking to follow love, she had found religion. The desire for it had never left her, and while serving others she was earning this reward. For when her life seemed to lie in ashes, from their midst the slender spire of flame, purifying while it burned, rose trembling toward heaven, showing her how great sacrifices turn to greater compensations, giving her light, warmth, and consolation, and teaching her the lesson all must learn. God was very patient with her, sending much help, and letting her climb up to him by all the tender ways in which aspiring souls can lead unhappy hearts. David's room had been her refuge when those dark hours came, and sitting there one day trying to understand the great mystery that parted her from David, she seemed to receive an answer to her many prayers for some sign that death had not estranged them. The house was very still, the window open, and a soft south wind was wandering through the room with hints of mayflowers on its wings. Suddenly a breath of music startled her, so airy, sweet, and short-lived that no human voice or hand could have produced it. Again and again it came, a fitful and melodious sigh, that to one made superstitious by much sorrow seemed like a spirit's voice, delivering some message from another world. Christie looked and listened with hushed breath and expectant heart, believing that some special answer was to be given her. But in a moment she saw it was no supernatural sound, only the south wind whispering in David's flute, that hung beside the window. Disappointment came first. Then warm over her sore heart flowed the tender recollection that she used to call the old flute David's voice, for into it he poured the joy and sorrow, unrest and pain, he told no living soul. How often it had been her lullaby, before she learned to read its language; how gaily it had piped for others; how plaintively it had sung for him, alone and in the night; and now how full of pathetic music was that hymn of consolation fitfully whispered by the wind's soft breath. Ah, yes, this was a better answer than any supernatural voice could have given her, a more helpful sign than any phantom face or hand, a surer confirmation of her hope than subtle argument or sacred promise, for it brought back the memory of the living, loving man so vividly, so tenderly, that Christie felt as if the barrier was down, and welcomed the new sense of David's nearness with the softest tears that had flowed since she closed the serene eyes whose last look had been for her. After that hour she spent the long spring days lying on the old couch in his room, reading his books, thinking of his love and life, and listening to David's voice. She always heard it now, whether the wind touched the flute with airy fingers or it hung mute, and it sung to her songs of patience, hope, and cheer, till a mysterious peace came to her, and she discovered in herself the strength she had asked, yet never thought to find. Under the snow, herbs of grace had been growing silently, and when the heavy rains had melted all the frost away, they sprung up to blossom beautifully in the sun that shines for every spire of grass, and makes it perfect in its time and place. Mrs. Wilkins was right, for one June morning, when she laid that blessed baby in its mother's arms, Christie's first words were, "Don't let me die, I must live for baby now," and gathered David's little daughter to her breast, as if the soft touch of the fumbling hands had healed every wound and brightened all the world. "I told you so. God bless 'em both!" And Mrs. Wilkins retired precipitately to the hall, where she sat down upon the stairs and cried most comfortable tears, for her maternal heart was full of a thanksgiving too deep for words. A sweet secluded time to Christie, as she brooded over her little treasure and forgot there was a world outside. A fond and jealous mother, but a very happy one, for after the bitterest came the tenderest experience of her life. She felt its sacredness, its beauty, and its high responsibilities, accepted them prayerfully, and found unspeakable delight in fitting herself to bear them worthily, always remembering that she had a double duty to perform toward the fatherless little creature given to her care. It is hardly necessary to mention the changes one small individual made in that feminine household. The purring and clucking that went on, the panics over a pinprick, the consolations over a pellet of chamomilla, the raptures at the dawn of a first smile, the solemn prophecies of future beauty, wit, and wisdom in the bud of a woman, the general adoration of the entire family at the wicker shrine wherein lay the idol, a mass of flannel and cambric, with a bald head at one end, and a pair of microscopic blue socks at the other. Mysterious little porringers sat unreproved upon the parlor fire, small garments aired at every window, lights burned at unholy hours, and 3 agitated nightcaps congregated at the faintest chirp of the restless bird in the maternal nest. Of course, Grandma grew young again, and produced nursery reminiscences on every occasion. Aunt Letty trotted day and night to gratify the imaginary wants of the idol, and Christie was so entirely absorbed that the whole South might have been swallowed up by an earthquake without causing her as much consternation as the appearance of a slight rash upon the baby. No flower in David's garden throve like his little June rose, for no wind was allowed to visit her too roughly, and when rain fell without, she took her daily airing in the greenhouse, where from her mother's arms she soon regarded the gay sight with such sprightly satisfaction that she seemed a little flower herself, dancing on its stem. She was named Ruth for Grandma, but Christie always called her Little Heart's Ease, or Pansy, and those who smiled at first at the mother's fancy came in time to see that there was an unusual fitness in the name. All the bitterness seemed taken out of Christie's sorrow by the soft magic of the child. There was so much to live for now, she spoke no more of dying, and holding that little hand in hers, it grew easier to go on along the way that led to David. A prouder mother never lived, and as baby waxed in her beauty and in strength, Christie longed for all the world to see her. A sweet, peculiar little face she had, sunny and fair, but under the broad forehead, where the bright hair fell as David's used to do, there shone a pair of dark and solemn eyes, so large, so deep, and often so unchildlike that her mother wondered where she got them. Even when she smiled the shadow lingered in these eyes, and when she wept they filled and overflowed with great quiet tears, like flowers too full of dew. Christie often said remorsefully, "My little Pansy, I put my own sorrow into your baby soul, and now it looks back at me with its strange wistfulness, and these great drops of the unsubmissive tears are locked up in my heart because I would not be grateful for the good gift God gave me, even while he took that other one away. Oh, baby, forgive your mother, and don't let her find that she has given you clouds instead of sunshine." This fear helped Christie to keep her own face cheerful, her own heart tranquil, her own life as sunny, healthful, and hopeful as she wished her child's to be. For this reason she took garden and greenhouse into her own hands when Bennet gave them up, and with the stout lad to help her, did well this part of the work that David bequeathed to her. It was a pretty sight to see the mother with her year-old daughter out among the fresh green things, the little golden head bobbing here and there like a stray sunbeam, the baby voice telling sweet unintelligible stories to bird and bee and butterfly, or the small creature fast asleep in a basket under a rose bush, swinging in a hammock from a tree, or in Bran's keeping, rosy, vigorous, and sweet with sun and air, and the wholesome influence of a wise and tender love. While Christie worked she planned her daughter's future, as mothers will, and had but one care concerning it. She did not fear poverty, but the thought of being straitened for the means of educating little Ruth afflicted her. She meant to teach her to labor heartily and see no degradation in it, but she could not bear to feel that her child should be denied the harmless pleasures that make youth sweet, the opportunities that educate, the society that ripens character and gives a rank which money cannot buy, a little sum to put away for baby, safe from all risk, ready to draw from as each need came, and sacredly devoted to this end was now Christie's sole ambition. With this purpose at her heart, she watched her fruit and nursed her flowers, found no task too hard, no sun too hot, no weed too unconquerable, and soon the garden David planted when his life seemed barren yielded lovely harvests to swell his little daughter's portion. One day Christie received a letter from Uncle Enos, expressing a wish to see her if she cared to come so far and stop a spell. It both surprised and pleased her, and she resolved to go, glad that the old man remembered her, and proud to show him the great success of her life as she considered baby. So she went, was hospitably received by the ancient cousin 5 times removed who kept house, and greeted with as much cordiality as Uncle Enos ever showed to anyone. He looked askance at baby, as if he had not bargained for the honor of her presence, but he said nothing, and Christie wisely refrained from mentioning that Ruth was the most remarkable child ever born. She soon felt at home, and went about the old house visiting familiar nooks with the bitter, sweet satisfaction of such returns. It was sad to miss Aunt Betsy in the big kitchen, strange to see Uncle Enos sit all day in his armchair, too helpless now to plod about the farm and carry terror to the souls of those who served him. He was still a crabbed, gruff old man, but the narrow, hard, old heart was a little softer than it used to be, and he sometimes betrayed the longing for his kindred that the aged often feel when infirmity makes them desire tenderer props than any they can hire. Christie saw this wish, and tried to gratify it with a dutiful affection which could not fail to win its way. Baby unconsciously lent a hand, for Uncle Enos could not long withstand the sweet enticements of this little kinswoman. He did not own the conquest in words, but was seen to cuddle his small captivator in private, allowed all sorts of liberties with his spectacles, his pockets, and his bald pate, and never seemed more comfortable than when she confiscated his newspaper, and sitting on his knee, read it to him in a pretty language of her own. "She's a good little gal, looks considerable like you, but you weren't never such a quiet puss as she is," he said one day, as the child was toddling about the room with an old doll of her mother's, lately disinterred from its tomb in the garret. "She is like her father in that, but I get quieter as I grow old, uncle," answered Christie, who sat sewing near him. "You be growing old, that's a fact, but somehow it's kind o' becomin'. I never thought you'd be so much of a lady, and look so well after all you've been through," added Uncle Enos, vainly trying to discover what made Christie's manners so agreeable in spite of her plain dress, and her face so pleasant in spite of the gray hair at her temples and the lines about her mouth. It grew still pleasanter to see as she smiled and looked up at him with the soft yet bright expression that always made him think of her mother. "I'm glad you don't consider me an entire failure, uncle. You know you predicted it. But though I have gone through a good deal, I don't regret my attempt, and when I look at Pansy, I feel as if I'd made a grand success." "You haven't made much money, I guess, but if you don't mind tellin', "What have you got to live on?" asked the old man, unwilling to acknowledge any life a success if dollars and cents were left out of it. "Only David's pension and what I can make by my garden." "The old lady has to have somewhat, don't she? She has a little money of her own, but I see that she and Letty have 2/3 of all I make." "That ain't a fair bargain if you do all the work." "Ah, but we don't make bargains, sir. We work for one another, and share everything together." "So like women," grumbled Uncle Enos, longing to see that the property was fixed up square. "How you going to educate the little gal? I suppose you think as much of Coulter and so on as ever you did," he presently added with a gruff laugh. "More," answered Christie, smiling too, as she remembered the old quarrels. "I shall earn the money, sir. If the garden fails, I can teach, nurse, sew, write, cook even, for I've half a dozen useful accomplishments at my fingers' ends, thanks to the education you and dear Aunt Betsy gave me, and I may have to use them all for Pansy's sake." Pleased by the compliment, yet a little conscience-stricken at the small share he deserved of it, Uncle Enos sat rubbing up his glasses a minute before he led to the subject he had in his mind. "If you fall sick or die, what then?" "I've thought of that," and Christie caught up the child as if her love could keep even death at bay. But Pansy soon struggled down again, for the dirty-faced doll was taking a walk and could not be detained. "If I am taken from her, then my little girl must do as her mother did. God has orphans in his special care, and he won't forget her, I am sure." Uncle Enos had a coughing spell just then, and when he got over it he said with effort, for even to talk of giving away his substance cost him a pang: "I'm getting to years now, and it's about time I fixed up matters in case I'm took sudden. I always meant to give you a little something, but as you didn't ask for it, I took care on't, and it ain't none the worse for waiting a spell. I just speak on't, so you needn't be anxious about the little gal. It ain't much, but it will make things easy, I reckon." "You are very kind, uncle, and I am more grateful than I can tell. I don't want a penny for myself, but I should love to know that my daughter was to have an easier life than mine." "I s'pose you thought of that when you come so quick," said the old man, with a suspicious look that made Christie's eyes kindle as they used to years ago, but she answered honestly: "I did think of it and hope it, yet I should have come quicker if you had been in the poorhouse." Neither spoke for a minute, for, in spite of generosity and gratitude, the two natures struck fire when they met as inevitably as flint and steel. "What's your opinion of missionaries?" asked Uncle Enos, after a spell of meditation. "If I had any money to leave them, I should bequeath it to those who help the heathen here at home, and should let the innocent Fiji Islanders worship their idols a little longer in benighted peace," answered Christie, in her usual decided way. "That's my idea exactly; but it's uncommon hard to settle which of them that stays at home you'll trust your money to. You see, Betsy was always pesterin' me to give to charity things, but I told her it was better to save up and give it in a handsome lump that looked well, and was a credit to you. When she was dyin', she reminded me on't, and I promised I'd do somethin' before I followed. I've been turnin' on't over in my mind for a number of months, and I don't seem to find anything that's just right. You've been round among the charity folks lately, accordin' to your tell. Now what would you do if you had a tidy little sum to dispose on?" "Help the freed people?" The answer came so quick that it nearly took the old gentleman's breath away, and he looked at his niece with his mouth open after an involuntary "Sho!" had escaped him. "David helped give them the liberty, and I would so gladly help them to enjoy it," cried Christie, all the old enthusiasm blazing up, but with a clearer, steadier flame than in the days when she dreamed splendid dreams by the kitchen fire. "Well, no, that wouldn't meet my views. What else is there?" asked the old man, quite unwarmed by her benevolent ardor. "Wounded soldiers, destitute children, ill-paid women, young people struggling for independence, homes, hospitals, schools, churches, and God's charity all over the world." "That's the pesky part on't. There's such a lot to choose from. I don't know much about any of 'em," began Uncle Enos, looking like a perplexed raven with a treasure which it cannot decide where to hide. Whose fault is that, sir?" The question hit the old man full in the conscience, and he winced, remembering how many of Betsy's charitable impulses he had nipped in the bud. And now all the accumulated alms she would have been so glad to scatter weighed upon him heavily. He rubbed his bald head with a yellow bandana, and moved uneasily in his chair, as if he wanted to get up and finish the neglected job that made his helplessness so burdensome. "I'll ponder on it a spell, and make up my mind," was all he said, and never renewed the subject again. But he had very little time to ponder, and he never did make up his mind, for a few months after Christie's long visit ended, Uncle Enos was took sudden, and left all he had to her. Not an immense fortune, but far larger than she expected, and great was her anxiety to use wisely this unlooked for benefaction. She was very grateful, and she kept nothing for herself, feeling that David's pension was enough, and preferring the small sum he earned so dearly to the thousands the old man had hoarded up for years. A good portion was put by for Ruth, something for mother and Letty, that want might never touch them, and the rest she kept for David's work, believing that, so spent, the money would be blessed. End of chapter 19. Recording by Jennifer Stearns in Concord, New Hampshire.